Hello everyone, long time no see. I thought I would start a new series on this channel that isn't really a new idea at all, to be honest. I've seen loads of other people do this on YouTube and I thought it would be interesting if I did the same thing as well. Basically, every month I'm going to go through everything that I watched in the previous month, whether it's something old, something new, something that I've seen for the first time, or something that I've seen a million times before already. I'm basically just going to go through everything that I watched in a given month and very briefly give you my thoughts on each of those things. Just because I think it would be interesting video series for this channel, and I think you guys would be interested to see what I've watched in each month and what I have to say about those things. And for the first video in that series, I'm starting off with the month that has just finished, which is June. I didn't watch much over June. I watched about 10 films in total, but what I did watch does vary in quality, so I think it will be interesting. So let's kick things off with the first film that I watched in June, which was Disney's newest animated film, Raya and the Last Dragon. I'd heard quite a lot of good things going into it. I mean, Chris Stuckman's review was very positive. I'd heard generally on Twitter and everything that it was a good film. So I went in with pretty high expectations, and also the fact that this film was directed by Carlos Lopez Estrada, who's the same guy who directed Blind Spotting, which was one of my favourite films of 2018. You know, it gave me good reason to be excited for this film. And after watching it, it's an enjoyable movie for sure, but it's not as good as I don't, at least anyway, I don't think it's as good as everyone is saying it is. First of all, the animation is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, that kind of goes without saying at this point, especially with a Disney film, but literally the animation is absolutely stunning. The pacing is also really well done. That's also one of the other positives I have to say about Raya and the Last Dragon. The pacing is so constantly engaging and keeps throwing new things at you as a viewer, and also at the main characters, that it keeps you constantly invested. Even when the movie does hit some lulls, you are still engaged because the pacing is so constant. However though, there were a lot of things about this movie that didn't quite work for me. For example, as much as I love the characters and their designs, the actual voice cast themselves is a bit hit and miss. I love Kelly Marie Tran as the main character Raya. I think she fits that role perfectly. But then you have other casting choices like Awkwafina as Sisu, the dragon in, you know, the title, The Last Dragon. And her voice doesn't really work, at least for me anyway. The script is also a little bit questionable in places. The story itself is nothing particularly new, but I did like what they did with the characters. It's one of those films where for everything that works, there's like a number of things that didn't quite work for me. Then I watched the new action film Nobody, which was also my first time back in a cinema since seeing Tenet last year. And I've got to say, Nobody was probably the best choice as my first film back in a cinema, because this film is so fun and entertaining that it was just a blast to watch from start to finish. I loved almost everything about this movie. It's not a perfect film by any means. I mean, it does technically feel like a bit of a clone of the John Wick films, but then when you realise it is written by the guy who wrote John Wick, you can kind of understand the similarities. Bob Odenkirk in the lead role is absolutely fantastic. Seeing him in a role like this is genuinely quite refreshing, but seeing him kick a lot of ass in this film is very satisfying, and he also lends a lot of humour to those action scenes as well, and that's one thing I must say about this film. This film has a really good sense of humour and knows not to take itself too seriously, and I think that's what makes this film work as well as it does, and kind of almost makes it stand on its own compared to the John Wick films, because if it didn't have that playful sense of humour about it and it just took itself really seriously, then it would just be a carbon copy of John Wick. But because it has that humour, because it has fun with what it is doing, it manages to kind of do its own thing to an extent. Then after that, I then watched this small independent French film called Spring Blossom, which is written and directed by Suzanne Lindon, who also, funnily enough, stars in the lead role. And yeah, this was a very pleasant and well-crafted film, considering the budget that she had to work with for this film, and also the age she was when she made this movie, because at the time of this video coming out, she is about 20, 21. So considering this film was made a couple of years ago, she would have roughly been about 18 or 19, and considering the age she was when she made it, and the film is as good as it is, and is well crafted as it is very, very impressive. It's very well made, the cinematography is lovely, the acting is great. I suppose the only thing that didn't quite work for me is that there are a couple of moments in the film where the emotion of a scene, or the emotion that a character's meant to be feeling, is portrayed through interpretive dance. And there are two specific scenes where this takes up the priority of the moment of a specific scene. The first time is at a coffee table at a restaurant, and though it is quite moving, it does start to feel a little bit awkward after a while. The second time it happens, which is in a theatre, works a lot better, in my opinion. But that initial interpretive dance thing that they do at the coffee table at the restaurant did feel a little bit strange, because again, there hadn't been any of that in the film beforehand. They kind of hinted at dancing earlier in the film, but then this scene kind of goes full on with it, and it does feel a little bit out of place. But then when the second one happens in the theatre, it kind of makes a bit more sense and is handled a lot better in the theatre scene. Then I took a little bit of a break from new releases with 20th Century Women, directed by Mike Mills. I absolutely loved this film. I'd heard a little bit about it before watching it, but I didn't know much about the film. I didn't really even know what the story was about. But as soon as it was finished, it was instantly clear to me that it was one of those films that I immediately wanted to watch again as soon as it had finished. I just loved everything about this movie, from the messages that it tries to get across, from the characters that were so likeable and entertaining to watch. The score is also absolutely gorgeous. The editing is also really creative, but not in an obnoxious way, because there are certain types of edits that this film does that, if it was handled by any other director, would come across as very flashy or obnoxious. But the way they're handled here is that they're included very sparingly, basically. So when they do happen, it never feels like they're just using that edit for the sake of it being cool or stylish. It's basically there to help get across the feel of the movie, and that is another thing that I absolutely loved about this film. The movie gives off such a warm and comforting vibe and tone and feel that you just get swept up within it from the moment it starts to the moment it ends, and I absolutely loved that about the film. After that, I then watched Pixar's newest film, Luca, which is getting a little bit of controversy, I guess you could say. A lot of people seem to be putting it in the same camp as The Good Dinosaur, and to an extent I can kind of understand why, considering it's a very gorgeously animated film that doesn't really do much else in terms of its story and characters. But whereas with The Good Dinosaur, that legitimately was an issue with the film, here with Luca, you can tell that that is kind of the point of the film. It's not trying to be this massive, over-the-top movie, it's just this very quiet and gentle film that isn't particularly groundbreaking in terms of story, but has these absolutely gorgeous visuals that are so detailed and vibrant and just pop off the screen so vividly. yeah, I really enjoyed Luca. It's easily not one of Pixar's best, but is definitely a very entertaining movie regardless. Then I changed things up by watching Tremors for the first time, and yeah, it's a really fun film that has a really good sense of humour as well. I didn't know how far it was going to push the humour, or whether it was going to go for just full-on thrills and horror and action, but it has a good balance. There are some really great practical effects in this movie, and the performances are really entertaining, and again are not too over the top that it distracted from the film. Yeah, Tremors is a really fun film. There isn't really much else I can say there. Then I watched Godzilla King of the Monsters for the first time, purely so I could finally watch Godzilla vs. Kong, because out of all of the MonsterVerse films, Godzilla King of the Monsters was the only one I hadn't seen up to this point. And just for a bit of context, I really like the 2014 Godzilla by Gareth Edwards. I really love that film. And I think Kong Skull Island is a fun movie. I like the fact that it is over the top and doesn't take itself seriously in the slightest. Godzilla King of the Monsters, on the other hand, is legitimately kind of crap. I mean, people complained about the fact that the first Godzilla didn't have much Godzilla in it, but this film legitimately kind of takes the piss a little bit. In Gareth Edwards' Godzilla, the lack of the monster was made up, in my opinion anyway, by the fact that it was building up suspense and mystery around Godzilla. King of the Monsters, on the other hand, is such an uneven split of focusing on the human characters and the monsters. I would say about 80 to 90% of this film is taken up with the human characters, and whenever you do see the monsters fighting, yeah, it does look kind of cool and the colours are really vibrant and stuff, but it's nowhere near as investing as the 2014 one. Yeah, this film really is just kind of boring, in all fairness. Thankfully though, Godzilla vs. Kong was a bigger improvement than I thought it would be. It's still not an amazing movie, and I don't think anyone was necessarily expecting that, but it's a lot more tolerable than King of the Monsters, that's for sure. The film is a little bit stupid, but I don't really care. And I think the film doesn't really care either, because it has just the right balance between how much human stuff it needs to show you and how much monster destruction stuff it wants to show you as well. The pacing is a lot snappier in Godzilla vs. Kong, which I think might be another reason why this film works a lot better than King of the Monsters, because King of the Monsters, like I said before, focuses so much on the human characters, but whenever you are with the human characters, the movie just grounds to a halt, and because you spend so much time with them, that pacing just kind of feels very sluggish. Whereas Godzilla vs. Kong knows what the audience wants to see and just kind of gets straight to the point with it. Then I watched a documentary called Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which is about a chef in Japan who has been making sushi for 75 years. And at the time of this documentary coming out, he was roughly in his mid-80s. So he's technically been making sushi his entire life. And yeah, this was a very breezy and very fascinating documentary that is very inspiring, but also rather tragic at the same time. It's inspiring in the sense that this man has been following this one specific passion his entire life, and isn't going to be happy until he's fully perfected it. So in that sense, it is very inspiring, because it almost makes you, watching it, want to pursue your passion until you have also perfected it. But at the same time, the tragedy comes in the sense that he has committed so much of his life to this one specific passion that he really hasn't been able to do anything else. I then ended the month by watching David Fincher's The Game for the first time. Considering how much I love Fincher as a filmmaker, you would have thought I'd seen all of his films by now, but I actually haven't. Even though I wouldn't personally put this as one of my favourite Fincher films, it is still a very enjoyable movie. The mystery and intrigue of the film is done very, very well, and is definitely the thing keeping this film going, along with Michael Douglas's brilliant lead performance. Luckily for what it is, the film does have a fairly playful feel to it anyway, so those moments where the story does start to go a bit over the top, you can kind of buy into it a little bit. But that being said, there were one or two moments where I was kind of saying to myself, really? You're gonna do that? But no, I would confidently put this somewhere in the middle of David Fincher's filmography. I enjoyed it a lot more than something like Mank, but didn't enjoy it as much as something like Panic Room or Seven. So that is everything that I watched in June. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on some of the films that I talked about in the comments below. I'd love to see what you think of some of these movies. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye.